Hi, this is Nicki Truesdell. I believe that education is discipleship. Anyone can homeschool. There's no such thing as behind, and it doesn't take 12 years to educate a child. Welcome to my podcast. Welcome to today's episode, which is all about homeschooling middle school. This topic and high school are the two that everyone fears or dreads because they only can think about the experience they had probably growing up in public school. So a lot of parents panic and then they forget the reasons that they started homeschooling in the first place and kind of throw all that out the window. And I want to help you to be comfortable with the idea of middle school at home, to give you some ideas, a framework to think from, and to kind of ditch everything you remember about public school. As I always say, this is not public school at home. This is you being a family, raising your family at home, and education is part of that. So let's dive in and figure out how to homeschool middle school. So if you went to public school, you might remember this as one of the worst, most awkward times of your life. Middle school is not just a school period, it's puberty. This is one of the hardest parts of a kid's life, especially the preteen and the teens. But just think about the fact that you can give your kids a very different experience than you had. Letting your kids be at home during this very difficult stage of puberty is a real gift. Body changes, peer pressure, just the lack of self-confidence in some kids this age, or even just the awkward stages of behavior. You know, some kids have a lot of self-confidence, but maybe they're a little awkward too. You don't have to put your kids through the middle school, public school experience. I can speak from experience because I was homeschooled starting in 6th grade. And so I never had to experience that whole public middle school lifestyle that so many people remember with a lot of disdain. My husband is one of those. My mom was one of those. I've heard so many stories throughout my life. In fact, I know some homeschool parents who started homeschooling at middle school because they did not want to put their kids through that. Whether it was because it is difficult and awkward, or it's because it's a really bad time to be around so many peers. And so just want you to understand that there's so much more to this time period in your kid's life than just their education. They are changing and growing at a very rapid pace and sometimes a very uncomfortable pace. And it's such a gift for them to be able to do that in the comfort of their home, surrounded by family, while still getting an education and still having peer interactions and social skills. Don't worry, they will be socialized. So in modern education, this is about 6th to 8th grades. In this stage of education, you might have a kid who is rapidly advancing through the school subjects, or could possibly still be trying to catch up on something difficult from the upper elementary grades. Maybe they're still solidifying some reading skills or writing skills. Maybe their math skills suffer, or all of that could be very much the opposite. They may be advanced students and just plowing through everything. So depends on the subject and it depends on the kid, and that is normal. That's what I want you to understand. Kids are all individuals, and there isn't a magic age at which they should be doing certain things. This is an important window when they're building on the basics of early childhood or elementary school. And I've already done a podcast on that if you want to go back and listen to it. Basically, those are the 3 R's, and then you can add in whatever you want. But now in middle school, they should be at the point where they are reading. I always say even slow readers by the age of 10 are probably reading. They've solidified the early math concepts, and they're working on maybe fractions and decimals and percents, or maybe they're still figuring out division and some of those things. That is okay. The goal is mastery. It is not to check off boxes at a certain age. So now it's time for them to be a little more mature with the way they handle these topics. Now they're going to learn to do more comprehension and understanding, reading more difficult books. That's not to say that they're going to jump into, high school or adult level classic works, but they're getting there. Some of them might already be ready, and others are preparing for that time. They need to be able to write sentences clearly, to write a paragraph, not necessarily saying that they can compose an excellent piece, but that they understand the mechanics of writing, not only neat handwriting, possibly neat cursive, but also capital letters, punctuation, all those basics at this point should be solidified. I know, though, that not everyone is. Sometimes you have a child who's been slow to learn. Maybe they had a learning disability. Maybe you've pulled them from a public school where they were not learning those things and you've got to catch up. I have spoken to moms who are foster parents, and then for whatever reason, those foster children are way behind. Obviously, there are exceptions to everything, but at this point, they should typically be reading independently, able to write some sentences and paragraphs at least, and do the basic math computations. Now it's time to start grasping everything in a deeper way. So before I go into the individual subjects and how I approach those, you need to understand my overall approach to home education. So everything I'm going to tell you following this is based on 25 years of homeschooling experience. I have 3 graduates, and my youngest 2 are in high school right now. But I also know that most people listening are still coming from the American way mindset. Most of you probably went to public school, and most of you are still thinking in terms of the public school system as far as ages, grade levels, when a certain subject should be learned, and what's expected at the public school. I am going to lay out the basic middle school plan with terms that everyone is used to, but I want you to understand that it doesn't take 12 years to educate a child, or 13, because K through 12 is actually 13 years. We do not need 13 years to educate children fully and well before graduation. I've written about this in other places. I have a blog post about it. My next book, one of my next books, is going to just be on this topic. But just understand there's a lot of busy work. There's a lot of time filler that happens in a public school. And so when you start to recognize that and get rid of some of that in your own homeschool, and it takes some courage to do, then you realize you can condense so much of the important educational aspect into a lot less time. So that's one of my approaches, is that we don't need all these years to give our kids a solid education. So my middle school approach is a non-standard transition from learning to read, write, and figure, or to do basic math, into using those skills to understand the world around them. And it's also the preparation for the last few years of their education, high school. And so middle school is definitely the transition period. And whether your child is still struggling or whether they're super advanced, it's still a transition. And like I said, it's around ages 9 to 12. It could be 12 to 15. It really depends on the student. So what your kids need is a focused plan to advance their academics and to keep learning, to keep moving forward, wherever you're starting right now for middle school. Proficiency in reading is key to all other education and to the rest of their life. So if you're still seeing struggles with that, then take the time to work on it. Take the time to get them reading proficiently. And it's okay if they're slow. Keep moving forward. Be patient with your child, but don't stop progressing. Don't stop helping them get ahead. Remember, every child is individual, so this middle school period can start at 9 years old or 12 years old, really depending on the child. And either one is okay as long as you are progressing. Even if your child is still not quite an independent reader, the key is to keep going. Keep going forward until they are. And they will be, I promise. Even if they're 12. They will become independent readers if you don't stop progressing. They will solidify those math facts if you keep working on them. But mastery of math facts is super important, and you can't just push them into the next level or the next book because of their age. It's very important to solidify the early math facts before moving on to higher math. And then, of course, writing, grammar instruction, all those things are going to come. But a focused plan is what you need, and also what they need. The public school system is not your system anymore. If you have decided to homeschool, you don't need to copy anything they do at public school. Anything at all. If you're familiar with any other government agency, like the post office or the DMV or the Veterans Administration, you are already aware that government institutions are not efficient. Well, the public school system is a government institution. I'm sorry if that offends some people, but that is the honest truth. It is government run, government funded, and it is not a very efficient system. So you can ditch the inefficiency of the public school system and still give your kids a solid education at home without government methods. Just ask yourself, if you start to panic about what you're doing, do I want to be the DMV? No. You're a family, you're a mom, you're a dad, you're a grandparent, and you are just raising kids at home. So the public school system is not efficient. Their methods are not necessary for you. And I want you to understand that everything I'm laying out right now in this episode today is going to take what you've known in public school and kind of throw it out the window. So instead, what I want you to do is focus on, what does my kid actually need to know? Sort of create a to-do list, maybe a list of the subjects you know they need to learn and a few things that you would like to add in, and then figure out how you're going to do that. Make a plan and move forward. It might surprise you that middle school at home won't be anything like the experience that you had in public school. So the two things I want you to remember as we move forward: be flexible, and remember that you're giving your kids the gift of a peaceful home life. Now, some people will say, I'm really scared to do this. There's no way I can teach middle school. I don't remember anything I learned, and there's no way I can teach it. What you're probably afraid of is trying to become a public school middle school teacher. And that's not what we're talking about today. So go back to the reason you started homeschooling and remember why you're doing this. If you never wrote those reasons down, don't go any further before you do. Because remembering the reasons that you chose homeschooling, those reasons are going to help you get through middle school and high school when the outside voices and the pressure from other homeschoolers or public schoolers or grandparents or whatever, when those voices try to convince you that you can't do this, I want you to remember, wait, why did we take our kids out of public school to begin with? Okay, now that I remember those reasons, I understand I can do this because I'm not recreating that system. You have what it takes. God gave you these kids, and you have what it takes to teach them the middle school subjects, even the hard stuff. For some of us, that's math. Some of us, it's science. For some of us, it is writing. Everyone's got a gift and everyone has a weakness, and every parent is the same. Even those hard subjects for you are not as scary as you think. The homeschool curriculum world is amazing, and there's so many options, and they are designed for parents like you. They're designed to give you everything you need to teach a difficult subject at home. Sometimes it's an online course. Sometimes it is a video lesson with the answer key. Whatever you need, it's out there. It's already been designed for a parent just like you. And so I don't want you to panic and think, I've got to get a middle school textbook on, pre-algebra, and I don't even like algebra and I don't remember how to do it. That's okay. You can get a video lesson with the answer key. Also, something that we've made use of and a lot of places have available now are outside tutors, specific homeschool classes just for those hard subjects, or even a cooperative, or maybe like a 2-day-a-week school. They call that a homeschool hybrid. So really, the options are truly unlimited if you search. And as I always say to people who say, oh, those options are not available in my area, okay, figure out how to create those options. Even if it's because you know someone who is willing to teach algebra, set up a class, open up your church, open up your living room, meet at the library, whatever is necessary. Get one started in your area so that other parents can benefit too. And if you are gifted in a certain area, I think you need to offer classes to other homeschoolers. That is just booming right now, whether it's online or in-person classes. That's happening in my area a lot in North Texas, but it's happening everywhere. And it's all because a parent said, hey, I love this topic and I can teach it to kids. I hope you'll just let the fear of the subject matter disappear and realize that the resources available are amazing and they will take the pressure off of you to be an expert in everything. So let's look at a basic middle school outline. And this part is very basic because everybody still has to focus on the 3 R's, even in middle school. But there are many other subjects to have fun with at this age. So I do want you to do that. Reading obviously is still top priority. No matter what the reading instruction period of their early years looked like, by now they should be able to read independently, and many kids will be reading proficiently. Hopefully, they're at the point where they've identified something that interests them enough to read books on it voluntarily. Not every kid will, though. I have 5 kids, and I have 2 right now who could care less about reading for pleasure. But they can read proficiently, and they do because I insist. So don't panic if you still got kids in this age group that don't want to read for fun. That's okay. You still are going to require them to read for school. Regardless of their interest, their ability should probably be pretty solid at this point. I just want to talk about literature as a course for a minute. Many people think, oh, you've got to teach a literature course for a whole year. Maybe you've got to do British literature and then you do American literature or whatever. I don't look at it that way. I don't separate literature into its own course or subject. I see it as introducing my kids to a lot of good books and requiring that they read them and encouraging them to enjoy them. You can't make a kid enjoy, but I do try. So the way I approach a non-literature course is to always have them reading something on their own. By middle school and high school, I will let them choose some books sometimes. That's a little trickier if they don't enjoy reading, as my 2 high schoolers right now don't. But I still will let them choose something, and then I alternate that back and forth with books that I chose, because without an actual literature course, I still want them to be exposed to many good books, whether it's a classic novel, a historical fiction, and some nonfiction books too, based on their age and their reading ability, and also based on what else we're studying. So generally, I assign books that go along with what they're learning in history or science. It could be biographies. It could be a historical fiction adventure novel. It could be something like a DK or an Usborne book. At this age, those are still awesome because they give a lot of facts with a lot of illustrations. And so I will assign a wide variety of books to my kids with some kind of plan in mind. And like I said, when I let them choose, they can choose just about anything. We have a home library, and I talked about that, I think, in the elementary podcast, that we've been building our own home library over many, many years. It's not something you can run out and do in a weekend. But when your children are little, it's a good time to start collecting good books that you want to have in your home for many years to come. And that includes books for your kids. And so we have a lot of fun books for kids, but we have an entire section that covers all of world history with all the things I just mentioned. We've been studying the 1600s, just about to move into the 1700s. And so the books that I have required my kids to read are things like Pilgrim's Progress, a biography of Isaac Newton. I don't worry about reading level. This is something that the public school system does that I just think is atrocious, honestly. The AR lists, and they test your kids and then they say, oh, okay, you're reading on a 4th grade level, even if they're a 6th grader. So then they just take them to the section in the library that is for 4th grade level reading, instead of saying, why don't you try whatever you want, read whatever you want. It's an inefficient method for teaching children, and it's classic government. So don't worry about reading levels. Pay attention to what your kids can read, pay attention to their ability, and find books that fit that ability, and then encourage them to move up or down. Sometimes an easy book is fun because it's relaxing. There's no pressure. and they just enjoy how quickly they can get through a story. But it's also good to stretch their ability and give them something a little bit harder. A note about abridged versus unabridged books. I am a big fan of abridged books for up until a certain age, or not even an age, a certain reading level, because the abridged books introduce your children to amazing classics in an easy manner so that they're not afraid of books like The Last of the Mohicans, because they're reading the story in an easy way. And then when they're older and they're introduced to it in high school or college, they're not scared of it because they already know the story's good. And then they're willing to dive in and read the full version. Go ahead and use some abridged books. One of the best parts of homeschooling, though, is flexibility. So remember that each child is an individual, and within your own family, you may have one kid who's more advanced than their older sibling or something along those lines. That's okay. Give them the space to advance, but always keep progressing. That's the key. Always keep progressing. I've talked about grade levels in a lot of my podcasts, but just remember that grade levels are a public school invention and you don't have to worry about them. Even if you're in a state that has some pretty strict laws about where your kids should be, figure out how you can meet those standards. Do what you need to do to please the state, but on a daily basis, don't look at your kid as a 6th grader or an 8th grader, but look at them as an individual and help them to keep progressing through educational levels, to finish a book with mastery or to finish a course with complete understanding of the subject. And instead of worrying about the fact that your kid is in 6th grade and maybe they're not doing all the same things that a 6th grader at public school is doing, or even the 6th graders at your co-op. That's not the important part. The important part really is understanding the content. So if your child needs more time in reading or math or language arts in general, give them more time. That is how homeschooling is so much better than public school. Okay, let's talk about writing. In the elementary years, you might know that I start teaching copy work right off the bat. And copy work is such an easy, free, and effective way to give your children consistent exposure and practice to good writing. And so, just briefly, copy work is exactly like it sounds. You're copying the words that someone else has written, generally from a book of any sort. But it could be a speech, it could be something they read that they liked, it might just be jotting down a quote. But the reason that copy work is so effective, especially if it's used consistently, is that it exposes your kids to great writing while also helping them to practice the basics again, spelling, using words that they might not be familiar with, and putting them into context. Of course, capitalization and punctuation, all the mechanics and stuff. And it also, if they're writing it down, it also continues to build on their handwriting skills, which at this point should be getting neater and more legible. And so I don't stop copy work until they graduate. We start it in elementary school and we go all the way through graduation. So what we do in middle school is a paragraph or 2 each day. At this point, they should be capable of that. You can let them write in print, write in cursive, and type. And I kind of mix all those 3 up because I want them to keep using all methods. At this point in their schooling, they can copy a historic speech, whole chapters of scripture, maybe portions of great books that they're reading or that you're reading with them in school, quotes from a historic figure, poetry, maybe something they're memorizing. The copy work can be writing the same thing every day for a couple of weeks while they practice memorization. And so at this age, a couple of paragraphs should be doable for those kids. But again, be flexible with your children. If you've got one of those that struggles still to write, or maybe it takes forever, back off on 2 paragraphs. Start with something smaller and let them work their way up. But remind them that the goal is to be able to write more quickly while still writing neatly and copying everything the way it's meant to be. And again, if you're still unfamiliar with copy work, I will link an entire blog post that I've written about it. But it's such simple instruction that you can basically look at the paragraph and say, okay, don't forget to put in the capital letters wherever you see them, especially at the beginning of a sentence, but also with proper nouns. You're reminding them of little bits here and there. Notice this quotation has the quotation marks around it, and the comma comes before the quotation at the end of this phrase. Things like that. Just remind them little bits at a time. And even though we're going to talk about grammar next, even if they haven't learned all those things, you're pointing them out on a daily basis so that they see it, they remember it, and they hear that voice in their head. They hear mom going, don't forget the capital letter. And so it's simple. You could give a 2-minute lecture on copy work each day, hand them the piece that they're going to copy. And, I think it depends on the kids. Some kids love writing. I did. I did my own copy work when I was a homeschool teenager before I ever heard the word copy work. I have notebooks still to this day filled with the things that I copied down that I just loved. And so some kids are going to be like that. And then some kids, like a couple of mine, are going to hate the actual physical act of writing things down. And so don't make it painful. Don't make it like prison. Give them what they're capable of that keeps it still within the fun window, and then pick up again tomorrow. If it takes a whole week for them to copy maybe a famous speech from history, that's okay. They're still doing the work. And that's my goal, is to progress, to learn, and to make it somewhat enjoyable along the way. Now, that being said, we also introduce formal writing curriculum during middle school. Usually between the ages of 10 and 12 is when I start with the Institute for Excellence in Writing curriculum, and it's called Structure and Style, and I'll put a link in the description, and I also have a review on my website. So at this age, I usually start with Level B, Year 1, Structure and Style for students. And obviously, they sell writing programs for elementary kids. You can start much sooner if you want to. This is my method. Copy work for several years. And then instead of throwing kids a writing prompt, write something about sharks. They're actually given a basic paragraph and then 2 or 3, and they're given step-by-step instructions for how to make it better. And this obviously progresses along the way, but it's not just telling kids, okay, write. It's showing them step-by-step how to do it and do it well. I love it. My kids love it. I've actually also taught it to local groups. Those kids have really enjoyed it, and my kids think that the teacher, who is Andrew Poudwa on the videos, is fun. So what we typically do in middle school is one writing course from IEW, and we continue copy work. And so I don't overdo it. I've said it doesn't take 12 years to educate a child, and it doesn't take 12 years of writing instruction to teach a kid to write. This course will give them so much to work with, and then we do repeat it again. We do go on and do more writing instruction in high school. But in middle school, we do at least one IEW course. And then we also do grammar. And I also have really enjoyed the Fix It grammar from IEW. I don't do writing and grammar at the same time. We generally alternate years. So we might start with grammar one year and then go on and do the writing, or vice versa. It depends on a lot of things. It just depends on our life and which kid I'm talking about. That's the beauty of the flexibility of homeschooling, is you get to choose. So after the writing course, typically we will do grammar. Fix It grammar meshes very well with IEW's writing because they use all the same concepts and methods. I do have a comprehensive blog post on my website that's all about homeschooling language arts. So you can see a lot more in-depth writing about how this looks in our homeschool. Math. This is very child specific because each kid is learning different levels of mathematics. And so you might have heard me talk about how a lot of our stuff is blended, and I'm going to actually talk about that here in just a minute when I get to history, where a lot of my kids do the same thing at the same time. You obviously can't usually do that with math unless you've got two kids pretty close in age and math levels together. So some children are math whizzes and some will be very slow. You might have someone who's ready to do pre-algebra at 10 years old, and that's okay. Let them do it. You might also have someone who's not going to do pre-algebra until they're 14 or 15. That is also okay. I was that kid. It's okay. The point is to keep progressing and to understand the work and to master the math concepts. So whether your child is fast or slow, it's time to keep moving forward. This is typically an age of fractions, decimals, percents, pre-algebra. That's the standard idea. But again, as long as your child is progressing through those levels consistently, that's the key. You will probably be very tempted to compare your children to other kids his age, to other homeschoolers, maybe to what you remember at public school. Please hear me. Comparison is the thief of joy. It will make you irritable and depressed and stressed. Focus on your child right where they are and don't look at everything outside your home. Help them to progress consistently. I also know from experience that your child may feel the need to compare. They may find out, oh, I've got friends that are doing math in a higher level than me. So I call this a good kind of peer pressure sometimes, because I've had children who kind of dawdled in their math and they were not concerned about how far they were going or how quickly or mastering. But there comes a point where they are influenced in a positive way to step it up. I've seen that in my own home, whether the kids are at church or co-op or something else, and they suddenly find out that other kids are ahead of them and they put a lot more effort into their math lessons all of a sudden. Now, it's not going to be the case for every kid because some kids are truly struggling. And if that's the case with one of yours, encourage them that they are doing the best they can and they're consistently progressing and that you are here to help them progress. And remind them, as I'm reminding you, that everyone is individual and there's not a specific age when everyone has to know certain things. There are levels like a video game, and different people achieve those levels at different times, just like a video game. And so just give them sort of a different picture, a different view of what math levels look like, and encourage them to keep going and keep progressing. You don't need to panic and put them back in public school. This is something I see too much of. The public school isn't going to necessarily help your kids solidify their math or get better at doing, decimals and percents and things like that. What is happening right now in public schools, and I have heard this from multiple teachers, and you may have experienced this yourself if you've been a teacher recently or you've recently pulled kids out of school, and that is that kids are getting passed through, advanced to the next grade level, whether they know the material or not. That is not an education, and they're not doing these kids a decent service. It's better for your kid to slow down and be behind a book than to be pushed through without actually knowing what they're doing. It's not good preparation for high school, which they will need. It's likely that they just need more practice. And also, I don't necessarily recommend suddenly switching your curriculum, because what I've seen is parents switch curriculum 2 or 3 times in a year because something's not working right. Sometimes it's the curriculum, but a lot of times it's just that the kid needs more. They need more time. They may need more drills, more practice, more explanation. So don't panic. Don't stop homeschooling, and don't necessarily ditch the first curriculum you started with and try several more in a year. Be consistent and be patient. That's the key. In our house, we've been using Math-U-See for 15 years at least, a very long time. Math-U-See middle school is typically epsilon, zeta, and pre-algebra. What I'm telling you is that they don't put grade number levels on their books. They just have math levels. And so those epsilon is all about fractions. It's a whole year with review of previously learned topics. Zeta is decimals and percents. And I'm telling you, when we hit the decimals and percents book with every single kid, we had to slow down and take it. It took much longer to finish that book. And that's okay. The first couple times I panicked, then I thought, this is how it works. The decimals and percents just kind of threw them for a loop. Not necessarily those concepts, but a lot of the concepts in this book. And so we took it really slow. Sometimes we would do half a lesson a day just because it was difficult and they spent a lot of time on it. And so that's why I say, as long as they're progressing, it's okay to slow down when something's hard. But then after a while, we would get to another part of the book where it was super easy and they would speed up and do 2 or 3 pages at a time. Anyway, my point is that Math UC doesn't really say grade levels, it's math levels. And I love that because they're progressing through different concepts with mastery. And then again, pre-algebra. But like I said, some kids take pre-algebra in high school. That's okay too. I have a whole math blog post. Actually, I have a couple. One is about starting math in a delayed manner in elementary school. But another one is all about different kinds of math that are non-traditional for high school. So that might be never taking algebra. I go there. And then it might also be looking into what they're interested in, whether it's construction, engineering, sewing, cooking, gardening. There's so many different ways to use math. They don't have anything to do with a standard math textbook. So you might have a kid who needs those outside the box math ideas. And so I'll link that below in the description. I just want you to remember to be patient with your kids and be flexible and make sure they master the math facts. So that's the 3 R's. And the rest of this is very important and done very differently by every homeschooler. So as homeschoolers, we have a lot of freedom, even in states with high restrictions when it comes to history and science. While public school standards require certain history courses in certain grades for no apparent reason, homeschool laws are so relaxed in this area that you can kind of teach whatever history you want whenever you want. Obviously, 50 states are going to be a little different in each state. But I just want you to think again about how the public school system is a government institution and how things are set up for bureaucrats. State standards are created by bureaucrats. They were created to manage hundreds and thousands of kids on an assembly line. Again, that's not meant to be offensive. It's the truth if you look at how it works. Every teacher must teach the same thing at the same grade level, and every student is required to adhere to that timeline. It doesn't even have to make sense. Government institutions don't. So in our homeschool, I don't even know what grade you have to take American history or state history or world history or government. I know some of those are high school level. In our homeschool, I teach what makes sense. And for me, that is chronological history that includes all the world plus American history and our state history all on one timeline. And I do talk about that because in a couple of blog posts where I talk about our curriculum, which is Mystery of History. And it starts at creation because we are young earth creationist Christians and we believe that the Bible is history. And so we have chosen a curriculum that teaches that. And so our kids are learning history starting at Genesis 1:1 and progressing through the historical timeline, through the centuries up to modern history. And we teach that in order. And as American history starts to enter the scene, we introduce American history. Our family lives in Texas, and so we introduce Texas history when that starts to enter the scene, which actually is along the same timeline, obviously, as American history. And we do that because integrating all the stories makes sense when you look at it and you see that so many things that happen in America are a result of things that happened in the rest of the world. And the same with Texas. Texas was part of that Spanish exploration right after Columbus. And so it makes more sense because it's all connected. Anyway, that's the short version, but I don't worry about what grade my kids are in and then pick a course for that grade level. And you can do the same thing. You can do whatever you want to do. if your state absolutely requires that your kids have certain history at certain grade levels, find a way to do that. But what I have seen typically is that if basically the kids know the material and can somehow illustrate that to whoever's in charge of your homeschool oversight, that's what's important. And obviously that varies from state to state again, but I just want you to understand there are flexible ways to adhere to the state guidelines and still give your kids a fun and rich history education. I have a blog post about making history fun because history is one of the most butchered and abused subjects in school. That's why so many of you will probably say, I hated history or I don't remember anything. It's because of the way it's treated in public school. But just imagine if you can do the opposite for your kids, where you can make it interesting and fun, and you can do that at home. It's just going to be thinking outside the box, using whatever curriculum you choose, and making it interesting enough that your kids want more. They say, read another chapter today, Mom, or that project we did was so awesome, or yay, we get to go to a historic site today. This is possible, friends. I'm telling you it is. And even if your kids might roll their eyes at it at first, what you're going to be able to do is make history make sense. And those who do not learn their history are doomed to repeat it with terrible consequences. So do your kids a favor and give them a true history education. And you might be doing yourself a favor too by learning things that you never knew, or remembering things that you thought you had forgotten. So our middle school doesn't have a specific history curriculum. My kids will all learn the same thing at the same time. And this is what I was mentioning earlier. We do family school or group school. So besides the reading, writing, and math, everything else is done as a group. That means I'm basically teaching to the older students, but the younger kids are all involved. They're listening, they're participating in some way, and everybody is on the same timeline. This means we use one curriculum for the whole family. That saves you money, it saves time planning, and it saves your sanity, honestly. Instead of having to teach multiple curriculum history times to 2, 3, 4, 5 different kids, everybody's joining together as a group. I will link a blog post about this in the description too. So our curriculum is Mystery of History. It has been for many years, and I do talk about that on my website. I don't care about state standards. The state standards are failing miserably. I focus on understanding whatever time period we're studying, learning about the geography, the literature, the art, the inventions, and the people of that time. My kids will ideally cycle through the world history timeline at least twice in their education, from elementary to high school. The first time will probably be on a more simple level. The second time through will be much more advanced with some deeper study, harder books to read, more in-depth conversations about the world and issues. So just for an example, we just finished Mystery of History Volume 3, and we spent 2 whole years on it. My teenagers, right now are 14 and 17. So we started this 2 years ago and just finished last week. But it was on the Renaissance and the Reformation, and just how much the world changed during that time period. And I didn't want to rush through it. I wanted to spend time going through all the different, not only the issues that shaped the world during that time, but learning about all the different people that impacted it, and the way they impacted it, and reading some of the great books that were written, and maybe watching some movies. This included Shakespeare. It included explorers who were all of a sudden discovering the North and South America. There's just so much in that time period, and we keep a timeline, and my kids even commented that the 1500s section of their timeline was packed with information. They ran out of room to write stuff. And so why rush through that if we don't have to? And so that's how we do Mystery of History. That's how we do history in general at our house. It's going to take some time, and it's going to be fun. Science. In the middle school years, I like for my children to learn science on that same historical timeline because they can. It makes a lot of sense for me, and a lot of this is naturally built into the curriculum we use, Mystery of History, because the author includes famous scientists, famous inventions, changes in the way people thought, things they believed. That's all part of the historic timeline, and really, so many of those things are affected by other parts of world history. And so it really is a fun way, but it makes a lot of sense. So for this, I like Berean Builders science curriculum because they have created a set of books that follow the historical timeline. So it'll have basically it's by person, by the different people in history who are scientists. And it'll have maybe a couple of lessons on that person, their beliefs, their experiments and inventions, and maybe whatever they did that impacted science or history, which a lot of times those were intermingled. And then it just keeps going through the timeline. And so you get the big picture of science throughout world history, but it also includes experiments. And so you can choose whether to do the experiments or not. We've done them and we have not done them, depending on the time and the student. But they also highlight the biblical worldview and include the Christian beliefs that many scientists had, which is left out of a secular curriculum. And I've talked about secular curriculum. I've talked about homeschooling from a biblical worldview in previous podcasts. So if that's new to you, go back and listen to those, because this to me is important. When a curriculum doesn't tell me that a certain scientist was a devout Christian and believed that everything that they were studying was actually put there by a creator, I think that's lacking. It basically is an incomplete education. Hey, maybe a scientist was an atheist and did not believe in God, and they still invented something amazing. I want to know all that. I want my kids to know all of that. That is part of the story. And so that's why I like Berean Builders. Now, general science is a pretty standard course for middle school, and many companies offer great courses on this. We use the 101 series from Westfield Studios, and it's video based. And it also has a PDF that you can print out. And I have a YouTube video of how we do that. But they have several courses, and general science is a good one for middle school because it introduces your kid to basic general science concepts. It's easy to teach. And again, from a young earth creationist biblical worldview. Middle school is also a good time to introduce your kids to some, different aspects of science like astronomy, dinosaurs, botany, whatever strikes their interest. Some kids won't want to do any of that, and that's okay too. But if you've got a kid that is fascinated by planets or something, this is a great time to just dive into that in middle school. Bible is something that should be a part of the curriculum all the time, but not just school. I don't think Bible is a school subject. It is part of life. So all of our curriculum, if you look it up and notice, you'll see that almost all of it is written from a biblical worldview, or all of it is. And so that's part of the Bible instruction, that our kids are not just getting something that has a scripture on the worksheet page, but anytime the biblical worldview is part of the subject, they are learning it. And whether it's history or science, or even in their writing lessons, good quality material is used to teach the writing. This is very important. However, it's more than that. The kids need to learn how to use the Bible and how to understand it. And so at this age, if they are independent readers, they need their own Bible. A good study Bible is very important, but also Bible study with you. And if you have not grown up doing Bible study, now is a good time to do it all together. Talk to your pastor about some good resources, or just get a solid study Bible and start at the beginning and read it together, because that is key. I always recommend the book Expository Parenting for this if you're unfamiliar with why it's important to teach your kids all the way through the Bible. I also use some studies from Not Consumed or the Daily Grace Co. for some different topical Bible studies. Those are good too in the middle school and high school years. But a biblical worldview doesn't just come from the curriculum. It comes from the Bible. And your kids do need to know the Bible. They need to know how to find scriptures in it. how to understand the different kinds of books in it, history, literature books, the theology parts, all of that. They need to understand that. And middle school and high school both are great times for deep Bible study. And everybody always wonders about socialization. Extracurricular activities are obviously a part of this, and those are up to you. You can put your kids in 10 different activities or none of them. It's really up to you. And don't feel pressured to perform by anyone, by just the outside world mentality or what you grew up with or your friends or grandparents or anybody else. Figure out what's important for your family and for your kids, and then choose your extracurricular activities based on that. Maybe what's free or what's affordable, or maybe something all your family can do at the same time because that's more convenient. Maybe you've got a kid with a special interest or talent and you want to help them grow in that area. The possibilities are endless for homeschoolers because they're not limited to the public school schedule. And so they can take classes at different times. They can get involved in things that the public school doesn't even offer. They can go take art classes or cake decorating classes or join a group and just learn how to sew. There's so many things. Obviously, you can pick from the traditional things like piano lessons or ballet or martial arts, but there's so many more. We've been in a homeschool co-op for 25 years, and that co-op has offered a bunch of things that I never would have dreamed my kids can learn in homeschooling, like Irish dance or even the flag corps and paper making and so many other things that I didn't know they would ever get to learn, but somebody else said, hey, I know how to do this and I'll teach some kids. Also 4-H, speech and debate teams, whatever is offered in your area, check into it. And if you have a gift and a talent that you can teach other kids, again, offer it up because other parents are probably looking for that. Before I close out this, I know it's kind of a long episode, but I want to talk about high school prep because a lot of parents are concerned, okay, am I preparing my kids now for high school, which prepares them for college or their future careers? Everything I've said may lead you to believe there's a blurry line between middle school and high school, and that's true, and that's actually a good thing. Because some of your kids might start taking high school courses while they're actually middle school age. If they do, I want to encourage you to put that on a transcript because transcripts aren't not about what age someone is, but about the work that they completed. So if you've got a 13-year-old that's already doing high school level courses, you give them the high school credit now. And if you haven't started a transcript, just start keeping a list. Keep a list and then you can start building your transcript later. I do have a blog post on transcripts and graduation credits and things like that. But you want to make sure you give your kids the credit for the high school work they did, whatever age they are, because some kids start early and that's okay. One of my sons was determined to graduate early. I mean, when he was 12, he said, what do I need to do to graduate? And so when he was 12, I gave him a list and told him, these are the requirements I have for you. In the state of Texas, homeschoolers don't have specific graduation requirements. But I gave him that list and he accomplished it. And so he graduated a year early by doing the list, kind of like a to-do list. And it didn't matter what age he was. If he completed the work, I gave him the credit for it. So that's definitely a possibility. And finally, I just want to remind you that mastery is the key. Learning to read advanced books, to communicate well, whether with speaking or writing, and to use math in everyday situations, these are the key to all of their future adult life. No matter what walk they go into after high school, mastering this stuff is very important. It's more important than finishing the book or moving on to another grade level. So make sure your students understand the material that you're presenting them. If they don't, pause and look for a new approach, whether it's slowing down a little bit, finding a video or a tutor, or sometimes another curriculum. Help them to master the basic knowledge now because high school, it's too late. They need to have the foundation because high school is now learning to apply that to the rest of the world. Enjoy this middle school time. Make your family time a priority. Focus on the individual person and not the future graduate. Help them advance their education while still having a childhood as they transition from kid to young adult. It's so important to remember that they don't have to have the middle school, public school experience, but they can still get a good foundation in academics that prepares them for the high school years. I hope this has been helpful. I hope that somebody listening has decided that, yes, this is doable. Middle school is not scary and it's not impossible. And I want you to look at the description below because I have a ton of links where you can go and do some more research and get some more encouragement. If you still need help, I offer homeschool consultations, 30 minutes or an hour. They're $29 and $49, so very affordable. And I can sit down and talk to you personally about your kids and your homeschool and help you figure out what will work and if you need help catching up, or maybe you've got an advanced student. Any of that's open for discussion. Go to NickiTruesdale.com and look for consultations on the menu. And join me next time on the podcast where we are going to discuss high school. Thanks for listening. Thank you for listening to my podcast today. If you want more content like this, you can go to my website at NickiTruesdale.com. That's NickiTruesdell.com, and find me on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.